are in a transition. We have a developmental minister, and we're in a search process, and we're aware that our governance structure has been very informal. And so we have committed as a board, I'm a current member of the board, to use, and I believe your term in your book, you have three definitions. It's governance by conversation, governance by partnership, and governance by policy. So maybe you could just give a little explanation of how you see this approach,
Sure.
defining it for us.
The book is called Governance and Ministry, and that's deliberate because, to my mind, the governance and ministry are two kinds of power that a congregation is wise to delegate separately and differently, so that each can be exercised by a person or a group that's well constituted to do so. Boards are good for deliberation. They're good for conversation. They're good for conferring democratic legitimacy on decisions about policy and direction. Whereas boards are not so good at. Boards actually can't do practical work, in my experience. When they think they're doing practical work, what they're actually doing is delegating it to individual members of the board. So governance by partnership is really important, because there's no more important task for a congregation board than to establish a positive working relationship with their principal staff member, often ordinarily a minister or a senior minister. And from what little I know about your congregation there in Bend, this is an ongoing story and will be a very important role of the board in the next several years, to create a trusting relationship with the next minister there. So that's the role of governance by partnership. Governance by conversation is the job of the board to host a conversation about important questions about the future that the congregation faces. So, for example, a congregation may know certain things about what you currently do and want to continue many of those, but there may be unanswered questions having to do with changes in your community, or groups that you'd like to reach that you're not reaching, or clarifying your role in terms of social justice advocacy in the community, that are really just unanswered questions that won't be answered in a hurry, because those are hard questions. That's governance by conversation. And then governance by policy is creating the rules and regulations for the congregation, applied mainly to the staff and to people doing practical work on what I call the ministry side of the congregation, so that people know what they can do, what they can't do, and what's expected of them. And for the board, what that actually means is that the board can spend more time on conversation and partnership, so relationship and conversation, rather than spending time tinkering with policy once the initial structure is in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, that helps, because we don't have that initial structure. So our focus of attention has been on that policy development. But
right.
I can see from your explanation it's only a part.
Well, if I could just comment, one of the part of the art of doing a good job of creating that structure is to do it well, and to do it in a way that will be understandable and clear to people. But on the other hand, B, not to get the board in the habit of wordsmithing too much, because the life that you want to lead the board into is actually a life that's much more about strategic planning and about conversation with the congregation and partnership with the staff. I use the term staff very broadly to include everyone who does practical work for the congregation that the board needs to be in relationship with.